That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Fear of God. I believe this is episode 15. And here at The Fear of God, it's a podcast between myself, Nathan Rouse, and co-host Reed Lackey. We discuss the intersection of faith and horror, a perhaps typically seen as strange intersection, but one we like to engage and find that there is a robust conversation waiting to be had, lurking around every corner. Typically, when I lead the charge, I make some stupid, pithy comment about where Reed might or might not be. But honestly, and it's usually related to the movie we're discussing, but this movie has, I'm worried that any joke I make here might be perceived as insensitive. So I'm just going to say, hey Reed, welcome to the show.
Really? I'm not following you. What
oh, there you go. There you go. Where you lead me, I will follow. I'll go with you.
Oh, man.
All the way. So, see, you're our scripture man. I'm our worship leader. I'm always the one dropping him song references.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true.
So today we are discussing, this movie came out in 2015, I believe, right? Maybe the latter part of it?
Yes.
Okay, it wasn't 2016.
No, and actually I think it debuted at some festivals in 2014, so I think depending on what website you visit,
wow. Okay.
I think it had run the festival circuit in 2014, but then was formally distributed in early 2015, I think like March or April, somewhere early in 2015.
Gotcha. But yes, today we are talking about the, I guess you could even call it a sleeper hit, but the movie It Follows, which, like the Babadook that we covered several weeks ago, sort of even like The Guest, a couple of these movies that, to my knowledge, and you can speak to this, didn't seem to do a ton box office wise, but really gained huge momentum. Kind of on the home level, and It Follows it did that. It Follows. So yes, It Follows has really earned a lot of accolades, not just, I would think, in the horror sort of circles, but really made a splash. It's just a darn impressive movie. So we're talking about it today, and want to hear from you, Reed. So, sort of like the Babadook, I believe this is your 10th viewing of It Follows?
I do have a tendency to rewatch films a lot. No, this was the fourth time that I've seen this one. But listeners are going to quickly catch on and maybe start judging me for when I love a film. It is not uncommon for me after an immediate viewing to watch it 2 or 3 times within the next few months, just to really, if I really responded strongly to it, to kind of try to put my finger on why I did and what I loved about it. But yeah, I've seen It Follows 4 times, despite the fact that it's only been released for me, a little over a year.
Well, I will, by virtue of iTunes' inability to let me rent it, probably be watching it again at some point because I purchased it in order to watch it a second time. Yeah, weird technology stuff. But yes, I've seen it twice now, and man, I tell you, you'll appreciate this statement, Reed, for what it says about my maturing appreciation for the horror genre. It is difficult to watch the movie It Follows and not come away thinking this movie does not even exist without the movie Halloween.
Yes.
I mean, it is just, from just the style of it in general, but even like the score. I mean, it's got a very Carpenterian kind of score to it. I just made that up, by the way.
Oh, but I'll take it. We're keeping it.
So, there's a lot going on, and we're going to get to some themes of this movie in a couple minutes, but just wanted to, bounce off some more kind of surface type stuff. What kind of worked for you? Was there anything that maybe even didn't work for you? For me, other than the Halloween comment, and I feel like we should, explain a little bit about It Follows. I don't like doing this because I'm sort of presuming most of our listeners have seen the movies we're talking about, but it does feel like we, in the interest of accessibility, should do this. So, It Follows is, gosh, how do you explain it? Reed, how do you explain It Follows? How would you, what's your elevator pitch for It Follows?
Well, how I've basically described it to people that I was trying to convince to watch it, I basically said, like, okay, there's just essentially a young girl. When I say she's a young girl, she's a young woman. She's an adult. But she has...
You've already failed in your explanation. You're like a young girl. Well, not really a girl. She is a woman. Or, well, she's,
Hey, you should hear me try to tell a joke, okay?
You're illustrating my point. This movie's a little challenging to just encapsulate in a sentence. But go ahead.
It's true. She basically has sex with a new sort of romantic interest that she's diving up with, but immediately following, that's not a pun, immediately following their intimate encounter, she comes to learn that there is this thing, literally the it of the title, that will now be incessantly following her until it captures her and kills her. And the only way that she can rid herself of this, and she's not even ridding herself of it, she's just extending the inevitable, is by sleeping with somebody else and passing it on to somebody else. And so that's essentially what I usually lead people in with. And it is it's one of those, it's the kind of film that is very much a template in many ways. One of the things I love about the fact that, let's just start with the title, and then I'll bounce it back to you to focus in on whatever you want to focus on. The title, it could be anything. Like, It Follows. The metaphor is almost on the nose for this idea of, like, the it could be anything. There's a strong resistance that I have, and I think you feel the same thing, to talk about this film in purely like sexual terms, because the film is, in the narrative of the film, the it is a result of sexuality. So it can be easy to sort of attach those things to the template, but that it of the title could be anything. And I just love we're big fans of Stephen King, and even though there's some complications to the story, to this story particularly, one of his most iconic books is simply called It. And the idea of just, there's this pronoun, it's not a he, it's not a she, there's very much a...
What is it, Reed?
It's it. It's it. It's a thing. It's it. You get it, right? It's it.
Get it.
You get it.
Oh, I get it.
You got it? Is it following you?
It's
following you.
Good. Oh, Lord.
They are going to lose patience with us so quickly.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, to bounce that back to you, is I really love the title. I love how simple it is. I love how direct it is.
It's very, you might say, provocative.
Yes. Yes.
Evocative, if you will. I mean, it follows. There's not a whole lot else you need to say. It's like, here's the thing.
Yeah. Here's the thing, and it follows.
Then it follows.
It's one of those sentences that they gave you in grammar school, like where they're saying, like, "Hey, what's the simplest sentence you can come up with?" He runs.
Follows.
Yeah, she follows, and now it follows. Like it's like, okay,
Yep.
The simple.
Well,
grammar.
I do like. Certainly, I had drawn the connection between the title of Stephen King's book It and the movie It Follows, but I do like that you just brought up, because it hadn't occurred to me that, like, sort of Pennywise, or however you want to call him in It, is sort of a polymorph, a creature that can change shape. I had not made that correlation to the movie It Follows, but that is an interesting interesting point to make. So for me, yes, the title is very evocative and provocative. I'm never 100% sure which one is most accurate to the use I'm trying to employ, but that's another conversation. Despite the sort of challenge of succinctly summarizing this movie for a potential viewer, one thing that I do think is incredibly well done with this movie is the concept. I mean, it is pitch perfect. It is the quote unquote rules of the movie are very clearly defined and very strictly abided. And I appreciate that a lot. There's kind of two particular scenes, both involving who you called the beau, giving some exposition that just clearly lay out. Here is what this character that he's talking to is going to experience. Here is what you, the viewer, need to know.
Right. Right.
And it's really, really no more complicated than that. I do think that not all of the movies we talk about would fit this sort of description, but I think It Follows is a Christian movie with the best of them. I think you can put it next to A Distant Thunder. As one, do you need to do, like, some youth group somewhere needs to do a double feature of It Follows and A Distant Thunder?
Oh my God.
And that person will never engage in any possible deviant act ever. like that is
It's a monster of an after school special, I'll give you that.
Yes. Youth pastors, I encourage you to show this movie at youth group.
Oh wow. We're going to talk about your cautionary
You will
tales.
equally scar and scare these children for life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I strangely, I didn't find my second viewing of it. I rewatched it. I'd seen it about 6 months ago. I rewatched it for our podcast. I didn't find it quite as sort of scary. There are a number of moments the first time you watch it that are just jump out of your seat.
Sure.
And, I feel like I'm jumping ahead to our scary moments, but wanted to give an extra little breathing room if there was any other specific likes, dislikes for you, Reed.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, I'm very fond of the script. One thing that I have heard criticized about this film, and it's an element that makes me love it all the more. I have heard some critics of the film is mostly praised, but I've heard some critics of the film talk about how they're frustrated that the rules are not very clearly defined. The rules of what this thing is and how it operates and what it can and can't do. There's a couple of rules that are very obvious, but not all of them are. And I think that's part of what attracts me to the story, because it's very metaphorical, even in its premise. And I like stories that don't spend a lot of time over explaining things, particularly in the horror genre. I like stories that are willing to leave a little bit of uncertainty as to what exactly could or could not happen. And so I think one of the things that I love about it is just how simple it is. And as I mentioned before, how it kind of narratively and in its basic premise acts as a template to infuse in it a sort of, I think it connects you more as a viewer, that you can infuse your own understanding of what these characters are experiencing, even if it's not directly related to, like, your intimate encounters in your own life. It's not directly related to that, or it doesn't have to be. You can still, and this will be something that we'll get more into when we talk about themes that it makes me think about, but I think that one of the things I just love about it is that the script, the characters, and the general film itself is sparse enough that I think it invites you to infuse your own perspectives and your own experiences into what these characters are experiencing. And maybe that was just me, but that's
Sure.
part of why I responded so strongly to it.
Well, no, I mean, it's funny. I feel like I said one thing I like about it is the clearly defined rules, and then you said critics said there aren't clearly defined rules. But so I don't know who's right there, but it's all about perspective, as we talked last week with Emily Rose. I'm with you though. I feel like there's this very interesting rhythm to the movie. It's got a very, like, I honestly, what I'm thinking of is like the lapping water. There's several scenes by kind of a big lake or an ocean. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think that's, and she's in the pool several times, but it's not like this Olympic swimming pool or whatever. It's this above ground, cheap pool, but those scenes are very quiet. It's a very quiet movie. And I don't know, I really appreciate the tone and the rhythm of the movie. Something you can let me bounce this off you as our resident horror meister. Something that struck me on the rewatch was I'll lead with this statement and then try to unpack it. I hope that there is never an It Follows sequel. And what I mean by that is something that I like about it is I don't care what this thing is. Like, it doesn't matter. You've given me enough of a bare bones sort of rule set that I can sort of run with. I don't ever want to know, was this a demon that spawned at the start of time? And now, you know what I mean? Like, who cares? Like, I think it'd be a terrible choice to follow up It Follows. It follows again. It follows you. It follows those guys. You know, like, whatever. I think it'd be a gross miscalculation of the success of the movie or what makes it work so well if you started a sequel with the intention of explaining what the It is. Like, so where I'm going with that is something that struck me on the rewatch that I think I like a lot about the movie is so many horror movies, so many sort of apocalyptic movies, so many whatever type of genre you want to apply to it, the stakes are bigger. Like, the stakes are, even in your Freddys, your Jasons, your Michael Myers, like, while those characters kind of generally just kind of kill one person at a time, there's this sense in which, if let loose, they're going to go nuts and kill everybody they see. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's more of a universal threat to whatever the monster is. I think there's something really fascinating about It Follows, that the threat is so microscopic. It's just one person. Right. Now, if it gets that person, it's going to go find another one. But it's just the one person. You know, does that make sense at all, what I'm trying to say? Like, it's a very precise sort of creature or monster or threat or whatever. I don't know. I just really appreciate it. Like, it's not like, and now it is going to destroy all of Seattle. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, this movie isn't interested in this sort of global universal threat. It's interested in a very specific, dare I use the word intimate kind of threat. Anyway, I know that may seem like an odd thing to pull out, but it's something that struck me on the rewatch. No, I definitely think that, like, its victims are single file. Like, it does not care at all about anybody even messing with it, as we see in the one of the concluding scenes. Like, it couldn't care less to go after the other people at the pool with Jay. It's only trying to get her. So it's definitely just to validate further what you're saying, that, like, it's definitely very focused and focused on transgressors. Like, if you haven't done what it comes after you for, then you have nothing to worry about. Well, but see, that's interesting. That's interesting you say that, and it cues up a thought that's related to what I was saying a minute ago, that as precise of a threat as it is, there's a universality to its potential victim. Everybody has such. Right. I do see what you mean. You know what I mean? Right. And I think that's a real interesting kind of juxtaposition, if you will. Real interesting dichotomy that, you know, maybe going a little too far afield, but that, I don't know, that was something that struck me last night on my rewatch of this movie, was as precise and specific and intimate as this threat is, and even though only one person is going to succumb to it at any given moment, anyone over the age of fill in the blank is sort of susceptible to this thing. And I think that's a really interesting, a new approach to kind of the monster movie, if you will. Here's a random potential dislike that I don't firmly believe in, but I'm interested in your thoughts. Has criticism you've seen addressed the fact that more than once in the movie, or once in the movie, the thing gets shot in the head, gets right back up, and then in the pool, they shoot it in the head in the pool, and you're left to sort of believe that this might be dead. You know what I mean? Like, is there some inconsistency I'm observing there, or is it just... No, that's definitely been... the kids dupe themselves into thinking it's dead. Yeah, no, that's definitely been part of the criticism that's hurled at the film. I do away with it by the fact that following that pool scene... it follows the pool scene. But immediately after that, I think it's immediately after that pool scene, Paul makes a very, to call back, it reminded me a lot of the film The Ring,
that he makes the decision to sort of put this thing out into a place that it's going to, and he kind of is making a rather judgmental decision, because I think it's right after the pool scene that Paul decides, okay, I'm going to take it and I'm going to give it to a streetwalker. I'm going to give it to a prostitute. And then that's potentially going to make it spread elsewhere. They do that following their encounter at the pool. So I don't think the characters, I have heard the criticism that you've addressed labeled as criticism, but I dismiss it in the reading of the film in the fact that after that pool moment where they do shoot it, then he still understands, like, we're going to have to keep getting rid of this thing, that it's going to have to keep just going further on down the line. But there is some, I don't know if I would call it necessarily inconsistencies, but there's definitely some nits you could pick with certain narrative beats with how the monster is undone or escaped. Even something we mentioned off mic, even to the random moment when they're driving.
Let me tell that.
Go right ahead.
Let me tell that one. This was my joke. It's funny. So we were talking earlier off mic and talking about inconsistency. I was just thinking about that as we were having this conversation right now. You know, the clearly defined rules that I'm praising, they do tend to break, at least in this one particular instance. You know, the rule set forth by Jeff with the pseudonym is it only walks. So it's not in run or anything like that, which is also, as we even alluded to in Halloween, sort of a Michael Myers trope. Right. But it only walks. And then there's the scene late in the movie where they're pulling away from the house and it is on top of the house as a naked man. And it just trips me out because it's like, okay, now you're just showing off. Like, you know, the whole movie, you only ever see this thing like pacing towards whoever its victim is. And you're up on top of a house, a 2-story house, no less. Like, come on, how did you do that? Like, why did you do that? It reminds me of like a trapped animal or something. Like, hey, so I'm after her. I'm not going to hurt you. Will you just help me down? And someone being like, okay, creepy, middle-aged, naked man. You know, like, yes, that is a definite inconsistency that is purely for the shock factor. Like, why on earth is that person up there?
Well, Ultimate Frisbee sent the Frisbee up there, so he had to go get it, you know? So it's like, I know I put it up here somewhere.
Because listen, even monsters need hobbies, and it is an avid nude ultimate frisbee, no less. And so it's not like she was hanging out up there, you know, like this thing, which the movie wants you to believe and you sort of buy in, is a physical entity. You know, it takes up space and has mass, even though only the person it's after can see it. It didn't fly up there. It didn't parachute up there and just miss the ground. Like, it climbed up there. And it's just really fun to me to think about the form of this middle-aged naked man just like climbing up on top of the house. He was just sunbathing, you know, and then remembered his mission, you know.
He's like, oh yeah, I wasn't here to that.
Oh,
like,
wait a minute. Oh, now they're pulling away.
Shoot.
Now I'll just stare menacingly at her.
No, my bad. I'm Santa Claus. I was just gonna come down the chimney and give you some presents.
No, stop right there. This movie invites too many of these jokes.
It's so true.
On that note, speaking of naked middle-aged men, let's talk about scary things.
Yeah.
I'll lead. So my first viewing, although I'm worried I'm going to take away from yours, I don't know, but my very first viewing, I would have come away saying the absolute scariest thing in this movie was the tall man's entry into the story via the hallway. Like, that is nightmarish.
Yes, it is.
After my second viewing, I think for me, that diminished a little bit. What I do think took its place is when we need to come up with a name for it. Just Pete, you know? Pete.
Well, we can't call it The Thing.
No, we can't do that because although, you know, it's Carpenterian, so...
Why don't we call it The Follower? Why don't we just call it The Follower?
That's speaking of on the nose. So The Follower it's too clinical, you know. He needs like a Jimmy, you know, like Jimmy,
Oh,
Is
you
it.
want to call the thing that's following her Jimmy, do you? That's what you want to call him. That's what we call-
It's better than the follower. So Jimmy,
man.
I don't think we've ever on the podcast gotten to a point where we might not recover from our laughter, but we're close to it.
Here it is, guys. Here it is.
Jimmy takes the shape of the neighbor. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Keep going. It's fine.
I'm trying. So Jimmy takes.
Oh man.
Do it. So the monster. I
Yeah,
can't
okay,
call him by his right name. See, that's what he does. He doesn't want you to call him a name. So
Oh man.
I think the scariest part for me, the second go around, if I can get through it, is the monster takes the shape of the neighbor boy who's been helping them. I can't. It doesn't matter. What's your scariest part, Ricky?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, So
So the monster. I'm going to try this again.
okay.
So the monster takes the shape of the neighbor, and so previously the tall man scared me. This time it was the monster taking the shape of the neighbor, and just his locomotion. Again, that sort of Michael Myers-esque. Nothing is going to stop or get in the way or cease this thing's movement. And it, does it knock on the window? I think it knocks on the window.
What it does
something. I know it breaks the window.
Yeah, because what it does is it essentially tries to open the door, can't open the door, and then throws something through the window to get into the house. Yeah.
Right. So it breaks the window and then just flops through the window, which is just, in the telling of it is funnier than experiencing it, which was quite scary.
Well, and I'll go with my scary moment here. That I think you actually didn't steal mine. I think the tall man.
You know where I'm going, though.
Oh well,
the crazy mom.
Oh man, yeah, where he gets up to the. Oh yeah, I mean, well, and the moment that really freaked me out, although I would definitely agree the tall man is a freaky moment. The moment even after 4 viewings that still unsettles me is the old woman chasing her through the halls of the school. And I think the reason that it creeps me out so much is because that's the first time that we've seen irrevocably that this is now attached to her. When you have your exposition scene where Jeff is sort of explaining everything, I think I can't remember if he's Jeff or Hugh. I don't know. It's weird. But at any rate,
well, his real name is Jeff. They go to the school and the school tells them.
That's right. That's right. So, but during that exposition scene, obviously we see the creature, the thing, and then it doesn't really sort of solidify that no, this is real, it's happening, and it's after Jay until that scene with the old woman. And there's some culmination of the music, the way the shot is framed, the relentless, deliberate pace of this old woman, the look on her face. Kudos to that actress who I don't know the name of. But, just the look that she's got on her face, just this very calculated and clinical, I'm after you.
Well, and I'm gonna talk over you real quick and say, I think you're also brushing up against too. What I would say, there's no particular scene that's so scary. It is how this movie is shot.
Mm-hmm.
Even established once the monster is present, after they have sex in the car and he tells her what's going on and it shows up for the first time, once that happens in the way in which he describes it, now even establishing shots become scary.
Right.
Because they linger, and because you have now, through that scene and through the old lady scene, have now been trained to watch the periphery of the screen.
Right.
This thing is going to be in the distance. Anyway, I totally cut you off there, but
no, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you. The part of the brilliance of this film is that it makes you pay attention to anybody who's essentially just walking.
Right.
Anybody. we even see that exhibited in when they come to confront Jeff about like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing here?
Yeah, the soccer
And
kid.
then he sees that person and is like, can you guys see that? Can you see her? I mean, it is a very sort of unnerving thought that it makes for the characters. You sympathize that they aren't always able to trust what they can see, and they aren't always, and they especially like talk about watch your back for the rest of your life. Like, I think you get, maybe my final sort of scary moment to list is I was never more tense in this movie than when they're sitting on the beach and you see the thing, like you begin to realize before they do that this thing is coming up behind her. It's coming up behind Jay, and Jay's back is turned to it. And then she even says, their friend even says, do you want to go in? And she's like, maybe in a little bit. And you as the audience are sitting there like, you should go in now. You should go in right now. But that's a very fraught moment.
Yeah. Did you notice? So I watched the rewatch I watched with my sister who likes scary movies, and it was interesting watching that scene with her. Because if you notice, the monster in that scene has taken the form of one of the friends.
I did notice that, yes. Yes.
So as the monster, as it is walking into frame from the distance, you would not be blamed. Like, they're really playing with you there. Like, well, is this it or is this one of them?
Right.
And then it cuts back to, I think the sister in the foreground with the water in the background, and you see that same friend out on the float. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Something bad is going on.
Oh, it's great. It's so great. I mean, I do think that the film is, and talking about whether or not it's actually genuinely scary or not, like, I've mentioned before on the show how I'm very protective of, like, my wife knows that I enjoy scary movies, and at certain times she wants to sort of enjoy that with me, but I have to be very sensitive about exactly what I let her watch, and has to have certain parameters in there. She watched this and loved it.
Really?
She thought this was a great movie and didn't. Yeah, no, she thought it was wonderful. So I think there's definitely a quality to it that is frightening, unsettling, and unnerving, but I think it fits in a very specific niche that it might be palatable for someone who maybe doesn't always enjoy scary movies, or they can't take more intense things. This is one that I would suggest to them as, in some elements, a little bit on the tamer side in terms of nightmarish things, but still very tense, creepy, and really just very strong as a story and as a film.
I love the opening sequence too. I mean, it's just a really strong. You learn a lot in just 3 or 4 minutes. Well, I say you learn a lot. You don't know what's going on, but that's part of the intrigue. Is there's a whole mini story told right there.
Absolutely,
that really propels you forward. On that, I do want to wind towards some thematic stuff because I got to be honest. The more I've dwelt with this movie or kind of marinated with it, the more I think it has to say. I think I want to tee us up a little bit into something that might get to where you're going. I don't know, but so I've got 2 kind of major theme ideas. One, I think something that's fascinating to me, like there's a reason I said at the top of things, like this movie doesn't exist without John Carpenter's Halloween. You pointed out something interesting that I would not have thought about of Halloween that I think is extremely present here. And that is this subversion of what I wrote was Americana, the kind of suburban American life. I'm like, in many ways this takes place in kind of any suburb USA,
Right. Oh, it does.
And you've got the idea. Well, there's this really interesting scene where I think it's once they've found an address for Jeff and they're going to go track down that location. There's a conversation that happens, and I wrote down a quote, and it's one of the young people talking about their relationship to the city. They're heading into the city. And she says something like, where the city started and the suburbs ended. The point she's trying to make is she couldn't go into the city. But what's interesting is that as she's saying this, you're seeing dilapidated buildings. And I think what the movie is after right there is this notion that the city is dangerous. You shouldn't go into the city. It's dangerous. The suburbs are safe. Out here, away from the crime, away from the what have you, you're safe here. But as with the movie Halloween, as with the movie It Follows, it's just not true, you know?
Right.
And I just really think that's an interesting kind of turning that safety of seclusion on its head. You know, like you're out here with people like you. You think you're safe and okay, but you really aren't. So I don't know. I just thought that was kind of an interesting idea the movie kind of plays with.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think that part of what I really respond to very strongly is when horror takes you into places that are supposed to feel safe, and they very distinctly are not. I always respond pretty strongly to, I think, middle suburbia. I think, you know, hospitals, the places where it feels like you're supposed to be protected, and this is the place where churches, places where it feels like, okay, this is supposed to be a haven, and it's clearly not. That for some reason, there's something that I haven't really explored very much on a personal level, but there's something that I automatically respond to when a film or a book has that as part of its premise. So I definitely think this fits in that category. It definitely follows that. Well, one thing that I had, and I know you said you had two themes, so I'll maybe take a turn here and then bounce it back to you. One thing that I had, it's interesting to think about this notion of, so let's bypass whether or not listeners will be frustrated by this and think we should or not. Let's bypass the sexual nature of the choice that causes it to come after the characters in the movie. Let's bypass that sort of sexual quality. And the simple fact of it's a singular act done one time, and it forever changes the dynamic of this person's life, and will ultimately likely end this person's life. And I remember thinking the second time that I viewed it, that really stood out to me a lot. This whole idea of people make good choices and bad choices all the time. But if you're anything like me, I have a tendency to feel like there is a merit and demerit system going on somewhere. This does not mean that I actually believe it. I just act like this sometimes. That when I do a whole bunch of good things, I tend to act as if I do maybe one thing bad, like, well, come on. Like I made this one bad choice. Okay, I made this one bad choice. Why do I have to then discount or dismiss the 75 other good choices that I made today for this one bad thing? But we know, just by virtue of looking at life, that there are some choices that forever define a person. That, there was before this choice I made, and there was after this choice I made. That literally everything changed following this singular choice. And I don't think there's much value in my going. Listeners will understand what I mean. I don't think there's much value into going into categories there, but I think that I find it very interesting, this idea of, for these people in this story, there is one choice that they make, a singular choice that they make, and then they are forever running away, literally, from that choice. They are constantly trying to escape that choice. And they can still be the people that they are. They can still have friendships. They can still move about their daily life and their daily business in any capacity until that choice comes calling for them. And at that point, there's a distinct escape that has to take place. There's something that they then have to do to get away from that choice. And it's something that I just find deeply troubling and deeply compelling, because I do think there's a reality. Again, I don't think there's much value in going into the categories, but I do think there's a reality that there are some choices that will break the pattern of your life and the rhythm of your life. And that when you make that choice, it's going to now be everything after that choice that you've done. And that doesn't even necessarily have to be in the negative. It could be in the positive, the choice to start doing something different with your life, or the choice to, obviously this film frames it in a negative way, and most listeners' minds probably went to something negative, as mine did. But just this idea of a singular choice made in a singular time that then defines everything that comes after it. I find that idea haunting, and I find it compelling. And it really makes me stop to think about the idle moments or the idle choices, the time that I would think like, oh, it's just this one thing, or I could just dismiss this one area. I can I can let my guard down. I could let my hair down. Anything like that. It's a fearful and frightening idea to think that it could be in one of those moments that everything begins to unravel. Again, we're talking about the horror genre here, so I'm not talking that it always happens to everybody or making some pessimistic statement about life, but it's a haunting and troubling idea to think that everything could unravel from one singular decision. What do you?
Well, and I think it's I think it's important to note, though, you were working there to clarify a negative versus a positive, and I think it's never do people say these things. I think it's important to dwell on the negative here for a minute. No, I mean that, but I was being silly there too. That, I think the point you're driving at is not the same in a positive life change, and that's not a bad thing. I think that the point, as I understand it, you're trying to make, and I think is a reality, is that people, whether intentionally or accidentally, will find themselves having made either, typically it's going to be a larger, but maybe a smaller, but like I said, I think typically larger negative choices are going to do what you're talking about, kind of cause the axis to shift of one's life in such a way that life kind of microscopes down, right?
Right.
To where all that you see and experience is informed solely by that choice.
Right. Right.
And it takes, and let's separate it from kind of the monster element of this movie, but let's not do that. Let's separate the you're gonna die element from it. But in the real, the monster is guilt. It's shame. It's self-oppression, right?
Yes.
It's the inability to sort of forgive yourself, and I think, I just think this movie does a good job of kind of illustrating that idea. And if we're going to wrestle with this from a faith perspective, I think it's important to kind of honor and recognize the contribution to the conversation this movie is making, which is, again, ignoring the whole, it will automatically, without question, kill you, but that there has to be a way above and through this guilt and shame and sort of inability to forgive oneself. I don't know. I do think that's a very good point. Do you have more you want to say?
I actually do, and it's funny because it's interesting because I'm resisting going here for probably some silly reasons, but I'll tell you what. As we're exploring this idea, I'll tell you what this makes me think of from a sort of a biblical narrative idea is Genesis chapter 3. I mean, I'm sitting here as I'm this is happening almost in real time as we're sitting here having this conversation. As I'm thinking about, okay, when you see the creature in the film, often, as we've both joked about and noted the sort of unnerving quality to, often it is naked. It's completely naked, and it's very naked in a very non-alluring way. It's just sort of very rawly naked and very bluntly naked, and that's interesting because I don't think any other character in the film is. None of the people who make the choices are, but the creature is. Nope. And so I'm sitting there, thinking about nakedness, and you're sitting here talking about shame. That the shame is following you, and that where my mind went was that verse that after Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden had eaten the fruit, that's what it says. It said they saw that they were naked and they were ashamed, and that's sort of where my mind went. And then as I'm sitting here thinking about this notion of a singular choice changing everything. I mean, there's probably no greater example of that in the scriptures, except for maybe the cross, than Adam and Eve eating the fruit and disobeying. Again,
way to play the trump card. The conversation's over now. You've gone to the prototypical mythological negative choice.
It's like, well, it's like if you're going to talk about doozies, like Adam and Eve, kind of broke the world. It's like, and it's funny too because then I'm also thinking about look at the narrative of the film. And again, this is happening real time, so forgive me, listeners, if this is a bit frenetic. But think about the narrative of the film. What choice do they have to escape this. They have no choice to escape it. It's coming after them, and you think about, the wages of
Right.
sin is death. Like, it's inevitable. It's one for one. And then what's the only thing?
I told you this was a Christian movie.
it's true. It's playing itself out.
I mean,
right
it's a
now.
fundamentalist Christian movie.
It's
but
true.
nonetheless.
But then, like, what do Adam and Eve do when they're confronted? Like, and this is, I'm not going to derail us into a side sermon about this or anything, but when God encounters them in the garden after they've eaten the fruit, and they say, well, we were hiding because we were naked. God said, well, who told you you were naked? Who told you were naked? And what do they begin to do? They begin to pass it off. They begin to try to pass it off to, Adam's like, well, the woman that you gave me is the
Right.
one that is the reason I ate the fruit. And then the woman is like, well, no, the serpent is the one who tricked me, and they keep sort of passing it on, which in that narrative only delays the inevitable. And that's that, well, this choice has now changed everything. This choice has now irrevocably removed you from what you once were into what you now are. And it's just fascinating to me to think about this idea. And obviously, the movie It Follows is much more microscopic than than the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. But still, in a way, I think the narrative beats sort of parallel this idea that you make this choice, you make this one deliberate choice, and after that, your eyes are opened. Literally, in the film, they can't see this thing unless they've made this choice. And now, what does Jeff say? He says, I still see it. I still see it everywhere. Like, his eyes are literally
Right.
opened. It's funny. I'm almost wishing that I had thought of this before entering into this conversation, because I feel like maybe my thoughts could have been a bit more concise. But just as we're sitting here talking, I'm like, wow, yeah, I don't think that the filmmaker is a Christian, but
In fact, what you're saying is reaffirming that youth pastors should show this movie this Wednesday at their youth groups.
official Fear of God endorsement right here for youth pastors on It Follows.
And I'm actually going to take this up a notch or down a notch, depending on your perspective. So you have intentionally sort of set this strain of the conversation aside, but as you and I talked kind of as we were debriefing the movie even earlier in our day, for me, I don't think an honest conversation about what this movie is trying to say is able to be had apart from the component of sexuality. And if I'm really getting pointed, I don't think an assessment of what we can discern or a conversation that can be had about faith components can be had in ignoring that. I think that it's fascinating, man. Like, I don't remember feeling this way the first time I watched it, partly because I wasn't watching it with the intention of serious assessment. But so we are in pre-election fever, where an extremely present, inescapable conversation point is sexual predation.
right.
And I think there is something very important happening in this movie that's relative to this conversation. And I think it is hard for me to watch this movie and not... Is there a male victim of the It in this movie? To a certain degree, yes, Jeff. To a certain degree. But Jeff does survive. The female at the beginning of the movie does get brutally killed. And they make a point of using the language of consent in the movie in terms of Jay and Jeff's sexual encounter in the car. But what's worth knowing is what she perceived as consent, he intended as manipulation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't think the movie It Follows exists like the It. I mean, I made the comment earlier, sort of half joking, that despite the precision of the monster, there's a universality to the threat. I mean, I don't want to venture a guess as to what kids these days, yada yada yada, in terms of ages and sexual experience and stuff. But I mean, in a world of 7 billion people, that's a lot of adults, and a lot of potential victims of the It, if you will. And you made a good point just a second ago. Like, something that's fascinating to me about this movie is again, using this word inversion, the inversion of sexuality. The characters who have sex in this movie, and there's the car scene, there's the neighbor and Jay in the hospital, there is Paul and Jay later on. None of them are nude.
Right.
And what is the monster?
Yeah.
The monster is nude in the very beginning when you first see it as the woman completely nude. The monster is goodness gracious, the pitiful, beaten, whatever has happened to this woman in the house.
Oh Lord.
There's the mom neighbor character. There's the the man who climbed to the top of the building. They're all nude.
Right.
And I think that's I think that's a very fascinating choice, that this movie is trying to say something about sexuality. And I don't necessarily know that I'm interested in saying exactly or know exactly what the movie is saying. I do think I'm going to borrow my interpretation of what it might be saying, or where we can take it in a useful, faithful way. Man, the church has so screwed up when it comes to sexuality. This is, you saw Spotlight.
Right.
I saw Spotlight.
Right. Yeah.
We live in a culture that has commodified bodies in grotesque and titillating ways. And the church does not know what to do, and so instead tends to sort of sit on the sidelines of this conversation in an extremely detrimental way, which results in things like, and these are charged statements, results in things like the Catholic Church being beset with problems of rampant molestation from adults to children. It is why a political party typically associated with quote-unquote family values has as its figurehead right now an alleged sexual predator.
Right.
This is a problem. And too long, I read a book years ago. I'm honestly not even necessarily endorsing it at the moment, just to say, because I don't remember everything about it, but I was really affronted with some of this subject matter in Rob Bell's Sex God. Did you ever read that?
I did, actually. I gleaned a couple of good things out of it, but
yeah. To me, it was just interesting because it seemed like it was trying to change the conversation from sex is bad and you should. Again, I'm not even going to track down all the implications of that, but because the problem that tends to happen is when you completely ignore this component of your life, we see bad things tend to happen. And something I was dwelling on today. You commented on the title of the movie earlier,
right?
And sort of the nebulous, but definitely kind of provocative nature of it. But here's the thing, man, to get Carpentarian, what do we call, when you're 10 years old in this culture, what do you call sex? It.
Oh, yes.
Doing it.
Yes. Doing it. Yeah. Yeah.
When did you do it? Oh, they did it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't know that the movie intended that, but I thought that was interesting. And we live in this, I'm going to borrow the title of the movie again. We live in this sex-crazed culture, and it follows us everywhere because we have such a difficult time. It controls us as opposed to the other way around. And, it's, my gosh, man, I don't know if you've seen This Week, and by the time this airs, this is old news, but it's why 70-year-old, thrice married, twice adulterous Newt Gingrich can scold a 40-year-old female journalist, calling her obsessed with sex. What? What is happening in our culture because we don't know what to do with this, and it follows us everywhere. It rages out of control. Because to me, in our culture, bodies are commodities instead of sacred.
Right.
I made a comment. I'm kind of ranting here, and I don't mean to be necessarily, but I got real passionate thinking about this. I made a comment a couple years ago on Facebook, and it was meant to be kind of provocative. And I just wrote, all bodies are sacred.
Yes.
And I think I may have put the tagline, even the bodies of terrorists, which clearly is meant to kick a nest. And someone came back at me and, well, what about X, Y, or Z? And I was like, I hear you, but all bodies are sacred. And why we can so rampantly roll over them in war-torn countries and why we can so rampantly commodify them in sex trade is because we don't view them as sacred.
Right.
We view them as, and hear me, myself, read, listeners, like, the reason, I think, is because for so long we, the church, have wanted there to be this difference, to be this dissonance between the spirit and the body, this sort of, there's a philosophical word for that. And
Gnosticism.
Yep, there it is. We want to esteem the spirit and shun the body. And the problem with that is exactly this. It results in abuse. It results in commodification.
Yeah.
It results in predation and assault, because the problem is that your body isn't sacred because it is the temple of the Holy Spirit. It is sacred because you, the sum of you, the mind, the spirit, the body, the personality, you are made in the image of God, period. That is why the body is sacred.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, to me, this movie...
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, to me, it illustrates this idea that we should acknowledge, and that's that we cannot run from our own bodily self. And hear me, I'm sort of using this word sexuality sort of in a more, like, there is a sensuality, that sort of Song of Solomon version of sensuality is what I'm sort of referring to, that there is a holiness to your body.
Right.
And I think that the church has just done a terrible job of integrating these things.
Yeah.
That was a really long rant. I feel like I should apologize, but I feel like there was some good stuff in there too.
Oh no, there absolutely was. I think, well, and to possibly sort of wind it down from there, I definitely think that there's a responsibility we have within the church to really not cast shame upon the people who lean into us for spiritual health and well-being. And I think that the idea that you're very deftly exploring there is something that I think for a long time people have they've just spent a lot of time in shame, just in general, over their bodies, over how they look, over their selves, over their personhood. I think there's just a lot of people who have spent a lot of time, because of the way that it's talked about and the way that it's treated, people have just spent an incredible amount of time in shame and in living under sort of a cloud of guilt and blame, and there was so much more to what you were saying, so I don't want to just dismiss all of the substance there with a little button, but I definitely think that the church has dropped the ball, to put it terribly mildly, in terms of how to really speak into this prophetically and speak into it with substance and with healing and with wholeness. They've missed opportunity after opportunity over a long, long period of time. I think in ways that even Christ himself did not at all drop the ball, in the way that he engaged with people and the way that he touched lepers and the way that he was not shy around women and just in ways that the figurehead of our faith did not exhibit. We have been very ashamed of ourselves, and we have cast that shame upon the people who have come to us for help, and I think that we should, as often as we can and in every opportunity, try to correct that and try to make it try to choose something different, try to use our chooser, to steal your phrase, try to use our chooser to do something different and to do something better. I definitely think we should.
Yeah, who knew It Follows had so much to say to the church, huh?
I'm telling you, man, the Fear of God official endorsement. Youth pastors, take note.
Yep.
Well, I think that was probably where we should leave it, where we should wind it down. And obviously, as we always say, listeners, if you have thoughts on this, we want to hear them. It follows this conversation that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it's not the end of the conversation. And we want you to reach out to us either by social media or directly, and let us hear what you think about some of the things that we've touched up with and this film in general. You can reach out to us in a variety of ways, as we always say. You could follow us on Twitter. Nathan, our Twitter handle is?
At The Fear of God.
That was very dramatic. I liked it. You could also like us on Facebook. You could like us on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Lackey. And Nathan, they can follow you on Twitter outside The Fear of God where again?
At the Nathan Rouse, equally dramatically so.
I know. You can also email us, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, we would just love to hear from you. Visit us over at More Than One Lesson, comment on the post, write us an iTunes review, just reach out to us in a variety of ways. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this. And as always, Nathan, thank you so much for everything that you've brought to this conversation. Really rich, good stuff that I loved a lot. And thanks so much for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, no problem, man. It was fun.
And we will just check out social media to see where we're going next week, and we will see you guys then. Thanks.
See you next time.
The look on her face. Kudos to that actress who I don't know the name of.
I think in the credits her name was listed as Jenny.
It was?
No.
You
I was
jerk.
making a Jimmy joke.
You jerk.